Well, our speaker today, as I said, is a very much a treat for us to have at Jefferson College. He's a member of our full-time faculty. He teaches in our philosophy department. Dr. Michael Booker has, in fact, been at Jefferson College since 1999. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree in International Relations from Mankato State University. He also received a Master of Arts as well as a Doctor of Philosophy degrees in philosophy as well at the University of Tennessee. In fact, his major area of study in graduate school was medical ethics. With that, he is incredibly busy. As I look at the list of things that he is involved with, today he'll be speaking to us in regards to his commitments and involvement with NATO. And so, having said that, he is a major in the United States Army Reserve. He currently holds the position of Executive Officer for the 2nd Battalion, 334th Regiment, 3rd Brigade, 95th Division. And if anybody can recite that after we're done, I'll give you $10. I promise. Along with that, as I said, Dr. Booker is very much involved both in the campus community as well as the own community here in Jefferson County. He is a co-advisor for the college's Honor Society chapter, Phi Theta Kappa. He's also appeared on numerous productions here on the Jefferson College Speech and Drama Department's stage. He is involved in the Cub Scouts and Junior Achievement here in the area, and then as well he serves as a member of the Institutional Ethics Committee at Jefferson Regional Medical Center. So with that, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to our very own Dr. Michael Booker.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Roger. Let's get that ready to go. Yes, okay. I do want to thank you, and Bill McKenna is to be recognized for having come up with the idea, I believe, of doing this speaker series so we have something for the community to kind of, is that going? Yeah. Something for the community to just share different things, and what I'm presenting on is not something I am by any stretch of the imagination an expert on, but I had a really interesting experience this summer, and I'll bring to you what I saw. I think there could easily be people in this room who know more about the subject than I do, but I still had a really neat time, and I just tickled to have the opportunity to be able to talk to you. You can always spot the Americans in these multinational crowds. We're wider than everybody else, and it looks like our laundry's been run through the bleach because we happen to wear the lightest colored uniform in NATO. When I did my mission with NATO, there were only 5 Americans out of over 1,000 soldiers, and you could spot us a couple hundred yards away because we always stood out because the very pale coloration. Let's go to the next one. Oh, I do, yeah, no, thank you. I'll do that, yes. So Roger basically told you all this already. I've been at Jefferson College and loving it here since 1999. I am the full-time philosophy department. We have some other wonderful people who come and teach for us in that area as well. Ever since, 85, I've been involved in the reserve component. I've never been active duty. I've always been in the reserve component. And just to really clarify something, there are a lot of people who've done immensely more than I have. There are people who've done tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. I have not been told to go yet. I have been politely asked several times and courteously said I wasn't exactly interested because I'm kind of busy. And so far that's worked. If they tell me to go, I go, but they haven't told me, so I've said no thank you, and they've allowed me to do that. Other people have not been so fortunate. We've had people on 5 and 6 tours to Iraq and Afghanistan by this point in the conflict. And the people that I was working with, as I'll tell you later, have enormous experience, particularly in the country of Afghanistan. So this is not abstract for them. What we were doing was a training exercise, but it was preparation for a lot of them for actual deployments. So I have been, right now I basically do paperwork. I'm going to go to drill next weekend. And what do I do on Saturday? Paperwork. Sunday, paperwork. Somebody gets to do that, and that's me. So they find a use for me. 25 years ago, I was much thinner and much younger. Yay! But that's what I looked like when I first started playing Army back in 1985. My history goes back earlier than that. That's my dad. My father was actually stationed in Germany. My mother, who happens to be with us, Elaine Booker, was there as well. And my brother was also born there. I was born in the city of Augsburg. This was 1961. This is the year that Germany got divided, and this was very serious business. Being deployed there was, the presumption was, what everybody thought was going to happen was not only a hot war, but a nuclear war was what everybody was planning on. My father's first assignment was with an artillery unit that had nuclear warheads as artillery shells. And one of the fundamental problems with having a nuclear warhead for an artillery shell is you can't throw it away from you very far before it goes off. That was a really ugly job. Okay, we are unbelievably fortunate in our history that this did not turn out the way that pretty much everybody thought it would. A lot to be thankful for. So the little guy there is me. Yeah, you can see the resemblance. While I was over at my training mission, I talked to the public affairs people to make sure that everything I'm presenting you with is permissible. I had to have a NATO secret security clearance to do what I was doing, which I evidently have on top of a bunch of other qualifications. Everything I'm showing you either comes from public sources, i.e. I took it off the internet, or it's stuff that I was specifically given authorization to use. Because there's a video I really wanted to show you just to give you a flavor for what we were up to, and I didn't think they'd let me use it, but I'll get to use it a little bit later on. So this is just to inform you that I am talking about some military matters, but all of this has been cleared for public consumption. The exercise I was involved on is something called Noble Sword, and it took place in June of 2010. This is a training exercise, and it's a training exercise that took place in the city, outside the city of Wildflecken in Germany. Now, to kind of help you with the map here, this big thing in the middle is Germany, okay? I said I was going to be moving. I warned them that. Okay, France down here, Germany. Now, there's just one Germany right now, and Wildflecken is about in the middle of it. It's at the very, very northern tip of Bavaria. On the map today, it looks like it's in the middle of Germany, but if you scooch over to a little bit of history here, I think a lot of people in this room remember that there was a time when Germany was cut in half. This happened the year I was born. And so Wildflecken is right here, and this was part of the main line of advance they were expecting when that evil war was supposed to start. And so being right there was not something safe and hidden. This was right in the front of some very bad things that were expected to happen. Thankfully, that's not how history turned out. There's an aerial view from Google Earth, so that's all legal, of the post. That doesn't really help you much with it. It was created during the Second World War for the Wehrmacht, for the bad guys. And because it was in the middle of Germany and it was heavily forested, the Americans never found it. And so we therefore never bombed it, and therefore at the end of the war it was still intact. After the war, a lot of the cities had been leveled. When I was in Frankfurt, they had a museum, and there was a big diorama that somebody had made of what the city looked like after the war. And it was a big gravel parking lot. And it has since been rebuilt, a lot of it in the old style. At least the downtown basically looks like it's out of the Middle Ages. That's all new. So they used it for a displaced persons camp, meaning for 6 years people needed a place to stay, so they used the old military barracks as a place to put people. The U.S. then took over from 51 to 94, and as everyone I met told me, can you read that? Okay, that was Elvis. He briefly visited there. He did not spend much time there, and he evidently put on a little show in a cafeteria. So everybody, since I was American, because again, you could spot the Americans from 300 yards away, had to tell me that Elvis had been here. So that's Elvis at Wildflecken. The American presence after 1990 has really been thinning out. I was in Germany actually twice this last year with my father, who was stationed there, and while we were going around Bavaria, he kept looking for the military installations, the ones he used to be at, the places where we used to live. They're gone. They didn't even get taken over. They're just missing now, because that presence, though it used to be enormously significant. He mentioned a couple of times that when in, say, 1961, if you were driving down the road in Germany, half the cars would be American, because the country had suffered so much economic damage and the Americans had such an enormous presence there. They're gone. So we used it, but once we got done with that and started to pull back our forces, it was taken over by the German army, the Bundeswehr, which is actually using very little of it. And as I'll tell you later, the Bundeswehr is getting a lot smaller now. The Europeans are really cutting back on defense spending. NATO, as you probably know, was designed to be an alliance to halt Soviet aggression, Soviet expansionism, and this goes back to 1949. The original members were 12 countries. Interestingly, Germany is not on that list, but Germany was central to what was going on there, and the idea was to slow down the expansion of the Soviet Union, which very quickly, of course, after World War II, took over a lot of Eastern Europe. And the suspicion was that they were going to keep expanding and expanding, and this was designed to stop it. There are 28 member nations in NATO right now. This is a heck of a grocery list. There's only about 200 countries on Earth. And this is supposed to be, by its acronym, the North America Treaty Organization. So there's a lot of folks in there. Basically, all of Europe has wanted to join up. We even have some oddball countries. Turkey's a real interesting one to see on that list. And one of the things that really, and I'll go into this later, one of the things that really awed me about what we were doing is that you had people working together with common purpose who have centuries and millennia of fiery hostility towards each other. To imagine an organization that has Greece and Turkey in it. Okay, if you know anything about the Ottoman Empire, that's like, what? And obviously France and Germany, France was out of NATO, it's come back in, sort of, kind of, all kinds of countries that have horrific bloody histories with each other in recent living memory, and they're all working together on this. And that's really, I mean, it's easy to be cynical about the value of something like the NATO organization, but some of this is just breathtaking, and I don't think we give it enough credit. When I was doing my exercise, this is from one day in the middle of the exercise, so it changed from day to day who was in, who was out. As I told you, there were, out of 1,200 people, there were only 5 Americans, and 3 of us were reserve officers who were just visiting. 2 of them were full-time Army officers, and 3 of us were just there for a couple weeks. The bulk of the folks came from Germany, of course, where we were stationed, Netherlands, and where's Norway? Norway, that only says 37. There were more people there from Norway. There was a bus full of them. Those are the 3 major representative groups there. But you see that we have people, and even visitors from Austria and Finland, who technically aren't even members of NATO. So beyond that 28 country list, there's a lot of other countries that work with what NATO does. I was at a Corps headquarters, C-O-R-P-S, and this is the German-Dutch Corps. And if you know anything about history, again, Germany and Holland do not have the friendliest history. Do you all remember the Anne Frank story? Ever read the diaries of Anne Frank? You know, Germans and Dutch are not always been buddies during the last century. And the fact is that they work together as co-equal partners in this Corps headquarters. Now, if you don't have any military background, some of this language is a little confusing, so I threw something together here just to give you background. A Corps is an organizational unit, but I'm going to start at the kind of the smallest without going down to squads or something like that. The lowest level functionally is going to be something like a platoon. A platoon is going to be led by a lieutenant, and it's got a few dozen people in it. Depends on what kind of a unit you're in. The next level up is multiple platoons make up a company. That's led by a captain. Companies form a battalion, and that's going to be led by a lieutenant colonel typically, something up to 1,000 people. I'm in a battalion, but we've only got about 100 people in our battalion because we're a basic training unit. We're a training unit full of drill sergeants, and then when we're actually doing our business, that 1,000 people is mostly made out of brand new, green, fresh privates who don't know what they're doing. And the rest of us are supposed to be in charge. Brigade then is the next level up. The next level up is division. You've no doubt heard of divisions. And so a corps is something that contains multiple divisions. That's what that terminology means. Now this corps doesn't have anything under it. It is a headquarters unit with nothing under it. And the idea is that this can then absorb other units from NATO members and coordinate them and work with them and give them the ability to do their jobs. And so I was with the top of this. We also had people visiting, but they were not organic to it, which means they don't permanently belong to it. Where I spent most of my 2 weeks was in kind of a weird series of trailers and tents called a Joint Operations Center, or JOC. And this thing is full of computers and full of stations where people come together. And again, these are all photographs I got from Public Affairs because they are very strict rules about what they can take pictures of. But all these workstations, and each one of them is labeled, so you might have one workstation that's medevac and another station that's going to be one particular form of supply. or a lawyer would be over at another station. And people would come and go from them. So one moment there might be someone from the Netherlands there, and then they go on break and the person that replaces them is from Spain. And that's how they did. We're all meant to be interchangeable in this operation. I was working with an operations center and something called an effects cell, which is relatively new, but anyhow, I was in the big tent area.
Yes. But how did you overcome the language?
I'm going to get into that because that's really an important part of this. That's my first big point after I do the intro here. That's 28 nations plus visitors from places like Finland. How many Americans speak Finnish? That's a puzzle. So here's what we did for the exercise. Noble Sword was an imaginary exercise in which we were helping the country of Beachland, which doesn't exist, who is being threatened by the country of Amberland, which also does not exist. And I asked, because when we do training, we typically use real countries that could be future hotspots. Part of it's just to get used to it. And I asked, why don't we use any real countries? Well, the minute you name a real country with existing hostilities, everybody's going to get tied up in their own histories. So if I were to work with, I'm not going to even start naming things, but the minute you do that, you start tying in everybody. This way we can all be unbiased about it. Under the Corps, there was the 1st German Panzer Division, and that's what they put that on their shirts, right? The horse. I didn't get to bring one of those home. That was great. That was from the Netherlands. That's the 13th Mech Brigade from there. We had a lot of people from the Netherlands. And then I really liked the Norwegians. They were a lot of fun. Their symbol is the reindeer. And they're the North Brigade. Their military is so small, they have one brigade. They don't have any divisions. They don't have any corps. Their one brigade is Brigade North. And the last day I was there during the slideshows, because we had slideshows and briefings going constantly, somebody took their icon of the reindeer and put a red nose on it. So they were not without a sense of humor, and that was received rather well. So here's what I want to get to, and the lessons learned, because there's a lot of stuff. I was taking notes while I was there. I was really curious what I could pick up. And when I came there the first day, I told them, look, imagine whatever line of work you have or have had in your life. Imagine somebody comes to work with you for 2 weeks, and they've never quite done your job before. It's really hard to integrate somebody in. Now, they were really nice to me. They were very welcoming, and they tried to put me to work. Largely, I was just sitting in on lots of meetings, and I said, I'm just trying to soak up as much as I can learn. The most interesting stuff that happened was actually in the evenings. Now, when I was there in June, the World Cup was going on. Now, you may have heard of this, probably not. There's this game called soccer that the rest of the world calls football. Oddly, it does not involve any protective equipment. And there's a lot of running back and forth, but they take it very seriously. So while the World Cup games are going on, we had this huge, huge tent. There was another one just like it for dinner, but this huge tent that was basically the bar. And you'd go there after you got done with the day and grab some really big beers. Grab a big beer and watch the game. And people, of course, could always recognize me as an American, come on up to me, and a lot of them wanted to practice their English and chat with me. Plenty of people did. Very gregarious folks. And I asked about a lot of things. Some topics I wanted to get into, we said earlier, I'm into medical ethics, so I was hoping to talk to the Dutch about their euthanasia policy. That just never came up, okay? Just couldn't bring that into a conversation casually. One of the things that puzzled me, though, is the communication. This is the question that George just asked, and it's a great question. I knew that the formal language of NATO is English. It has to be something. When you've got 28 plus nations working together, they got to speak some common language. And what surprised me, because I've been back and forth from Europe a bunch of times growing up, is I was expecting primarily British English to be the English of choice. That is to say, England is a member of NATO just like we are, but they're right next door. If you live in Holland, they're just across the channel from you. But everybody pretty much was working in American English, and really idiomatic, that is very detailed American English. The first day I was there, maybe the second day, somebody wanted to ask me a question, and I'm ready for some really basic question about grammar or something. They asked me about the word ludicrous. And I'm going, why would you want to know about the word ludicrous? The only thing I could think of was there's a rap star who's got a name vaguely like that, except he spells it wrong. No, they had watched the Mel Brooks movie Spaceballs in English, and the spaceship in this comedy goes to ludicrous speed. And so they're trying to figure out the exact definition of ludicrous. Like, holy cow. But I asked quite a few people about this because it kept surprising me. Everybody was coming up with American rather than British English. And when I was a kid, it was always British English. When I was in France, while I was in high school, British English was always what ruled the day. Well, they said this. My first guess was wrong. I thought it was because they watch our TV shows and our movies, which they do, but they just dub them over. So, okay, that wasn't it. Well, they've figured out that the language of the world now, they say, if you know British English, that's not very good. A lot of people will just not understand you. If you want to be understood wherever you go in the world, you strive for a good American English accent. And that really surprised me. And again, this is an odd group of people in a lot of ways, but the kindness that they had and the thoughts, one of the Norwegians sat me down and tried to explain to me, because I didn't understand this. You all know about the Marshall Plan, right? After World War II. This just extraordinary decision the country made to rebuild Europe after we'd blown it up. You know, winners don't typically do that. That's not our job. That's something unique, really, in the history of the world. Well, this guy from Norway starts talking about how the Marshall Plan rebuilt Norway. I didn't know we were in Norway with the Marshall Plan. Oh, yes, and he starts going into elaborate detail about how his country got rebuilt by the Americans after World War II. So again, this is not maybe a normal statistically average population that I was dealing with, but I was looking for anti-American hostility. We hear these stories that all around the world they snarl at us, and you'd better pretend you're Canadian because they will hate you if you're American. That's nothing like that, nothing like that. One of the things, and I think this might have ended up in the little article that wound up in the Leader, but there were a couple of anecdotes that really were very touching. And the people, and a lot of the soldiers I was working with had been to America for various reasons. And there was, let's see if I can get his picture up here, Mike Helms, who was from the Netherlands. Almost, there we go. Okay, there's Mike right back there. He'd been traveling years ago, and this is after 9/11, but he was traveling in the United States with his supervisor. He was a sergeant major at the time. He's a warrant officer now, and I won't try to explain all that to you, but he was a sergeant major at the time. And he and his boss were in military uniforms, Dutch, that is from the Netherlands, military uniforms in an airport in Mississippi. Two businessmen, they're about to catch a flight, two businessmen came up to them and said, "We're in first class, would you like to take our seats? We'll take your seats back in coach." And Mike told me, "Hey guys, we're not American. Look at the little flag on our uniform. Their flag is red, white, and blue, but it's not us." And so, thanks for the offer, but obviously you've misunderstood. We're from the Netherlands. "Well, you're our allies, aren't you?" "Yeah." "Well, good. Have some seats up in first class." To a person, everyone I talked to from the German and the Norwegian and all these other countries said, in their own countries right now, the military is looked down upon. What they described for me is a situation that's perhaps what you might recall back from the Vietnam era. They do not go in public in their uniforms in their home countries. They are not respected at all for being in the military. American culture, everybody who's been to America is in awe of the incredibly supportive and kind treatment that soldiers get in this country. And they have no experience at home that even remotely resembles that. So that's a story I got in a number of different ways from different people. So that was really touching to, and again, he said Mississippi, and I thought, oh no, how's this gonna go? No. The demands on the Allied forces, these guys have really small armies. I've just put something up here. Again, this is just public data that I pulled off the internet that shows the size of military budgets for other people in NATO. This isn't even the whole list. This is from 2006. Look at the US military budget for 2006. $667.7 billion. We spend about 20% of our budget at the federal level on the military, pretty consistently around 20%. The next biggest budget is for the UK. That's less than 10% of our budget. You get down to a country like the Netherlands, that's $10 billion. We probably spend that much on toilet paper. And so they have very small armies. And in the back of the room, I put just a few little items up there that I brought back with me. But one is a newspaper I get every week that's a trade publication about national defense and international defense policy. The Germans right now are looking at cutting. They've got 75,000 civilians working with the military. They're going to cut out 25,000 jobs. They're going to cut a third of their civilian positions. While I was there, the general in charge of the 1st Panzer Division was meeting with and he came into town because this was still Germany, the head of the Department of Defense, the Ministry of Defense, was there to talk to him about the new budget cuts coming, which I think were about 25% of their budget was about to be cut. They are taking horrific budget cuts. They have small militaries and they're getting smaller. One of the things that this is mattering for Germany is not so much the military. They're getting rid of the draft because the draft is expensive. They've had it for a long time. The way their draft works for the military, though, you're only in for 6 months. So all they said it's not really useful to them. It's like an audition. They try you out for 6 months, and if they like you, they tell you to maybe stick around for a while. By the way, in our military, you work 20 years to get retirement benefits. Some of you may have heard of that. German Army, it's 35 years to get retirement benefits. And their promotion structure is very slow. I met some corporals who would have been E7s. They would have been sergeant first class or something like that in our Army, given how long they'd been around and how much they could do. So they have very tiny militaries, and what this means is when they help the United States in Afghanistan, they're going there all the time. These people I met have gone under lots of deployments to Afghanistan. Most of the countries are not involved with this in Iraq. Some are, but most aren't. The people I was meeting with were not in Iraq, but they were in Afghanistan. There was one little baby-faced corporal there. He was a scout, and I used to work in a unit that had scouts, so I was chatting with him. He's Minnow right down here. I mean, he looks like a kid. He looks like one of our students. I asked him, I used to work with scouts. What kind of vehicles do you use? Do you use things like basically Jeeps, or you use armored vehicles, aluminum armored vehicles? And he went down the list of everything that was being used in Afghanistan and then described in very clear detail what happened to each one of those vehicles when they were hit with an improvised explosive device. And it was clear from his discussion, this was not textbook. He'd seen every last one of these things hit with IEDs and talked individually like, the driver was lucky in that case, or everybody in the vehicle died in another case. So these people have put in a lot, and they get, again, no respect from their own society. Their militaries are being slashed past being cut to the bone. And so these are people, again, whatever one may think about it, these are extraordinary individuals who give up an awful lot. For what? Again, what's the vested interest for them being in Afghanistan? Well, it's what they do. The role of the media is huge, and I've got a little tape. It's going to take about 6 minutes here, and I got permission to bring this thing. Every morning, because the media is so important now for military policy, public perception is so important, there was a British company contracted to produce a morning news broadcast for us based on the scenario that we were in. So if a helicopter crashed the day before, in the news broadcast they would talk about the helicopter crash and then what the response of the local population was. The people that they're interviewing who are in uniform are actually soldiers. They actually have real people there, and there's, in fact, you're going to love it, there's a German guy who there sounds like Arnold Schwarzenegger up one side and down the other. But they're just real people, and they would interview them like they're going to be interviewing with the media, because the media perception is huge. And this is something that, frankly, during World War II, we weren't that worried about what was going to be on CNN. But it drives a lot of what goes on. So if we can put that on, please.
Good evening, welcome to Crown Media News. Medical experts say they're fighting a major outbreak of cholera to prevent an epidemic after the number of people affected rose sharply. The problem is greatest in improvised refugee camps around the area of Bad Bevensen. Latest figures show 40 people have died and 1,500 are suffering. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees says it is deeply concerned. The problem is caused by poor sanitation and dirty water. NATO says it will do all that it can to assist.
The treatment of cholera from the medical side is not a very difficult, it's not a big problem. If the local authorities need help, we always are willing to help. And in this moment we are checking with them the kind of help we can offer.
There have been 2 arrests following the discovery of a mass grave near Lauenburg. Beachland police say they have detained 2 people suspected of being behind the murder of ethnic Ambulandians. The site is currently under investigation. Meanwhile, the pro-Ambulant group Scorpions of Lüneburg have hit out at Beachland and NATO forces who are preventing families of those who disappeared from visiting the site. 3 lorries belonging to the World Food Programme were attacked early this morning. It happened at Zeven. 2 trucks, which were unloading at the time, were completely destroyed by the gunmen. The third was driven away with its driver. It has not been traced. 3 Polish soldiers who were abducted at the weekend, along with 40,000 euros, have been recovered in a daring overnight operation. NATO says they are well and that the operation was successful.
Well, it's a typical search and rescue operation. That means you have forces to go into a certain area, get the people and go out again.
Does much intelligence have to be gathered beforehand?
Well, I will not talk about any intelligence, but obviously you need information.
And how are the 3 Polish soldiers?
Well, the NATO soldiers which were missing since 2 days, they are well, they are fine, they are back to the contingent and they are happy to be back here.
It's not clear why the Polish soldiers were eating in a restaurant when they had the 40,000 euros of payroll money, and NATO says it will examine its procedures to see if there are lessons for the future. A new ferry is in operation over the River Elbe. After a major operation, the ferry is being used near the bridge at Gestacht because NATO feared its lorries and heavy machinery would cause damage to the existing structure. The ferry also eases traffic across the River Elbe, which has had several major links, including the Hamburg Tunnel, cut.
The job on the river is we installed a ferry to ensure the river crossing with military equipment and military vehicles. For the reason they are very heavy, and if we take the infrastructure we have already here, we risk further damage, and that's definitely not what we want, because we're here to improve the situation, not to worsen it.
However, as NATO develops one transport link, there are still major questions over the conduct of drivers on the road. The mayor of Lüneburg is still seeking answers after Monday's bus crash which killed 12 people. He says NATO has been quick to clear itself of blame, and while he is open-minded, he does believe there are still outstanding questions.
12 of my people were killed in the bus crash. I have several times asked for a meeting with NATO. This is ignored. NATO says that police investigation is closed. I can say it is not. NATO are guests in our country, valued guests, but their silences only lead to suspicion and tension. Thank you.
Meanwhile, the police chief in Lüneburg has accused NATO of not supporting an operation to seize weapons. 2 police officers were killed and 1 wounded when a booby trap went off. The weapons were not seized. Police Chief Heiko Milbrand says he asked NATO for support, but he didn't receive any. Finally, violence has flared again today in Kiel. Protesters have taken to the streets. This time they were armed with Molotov cocktail bombs. This follows 2 previous days of violence in the Holstein provincial capital. Local security forces appear to be struggling with coping with the violence, and several policemen were taken to hospital today. It's thought that local gangs are behind the protests. Well, that's all from Crown Media News for this evening. From myself and the Crown team, thank you for watching.
I just want to give you a sense of what they were doing. This is something we'd all get around and watch every morning and watch the media's take on what we had thought was going on the day before. The city names they're using are all Germany. We're just using a German map, but the countries of Amberland and Beachland, again, are fake. But we were trying to, again, understand this media cycle, which then drives public perception, which has a lot to do with the success of military operations, really a lot more so than the actual technical success of what's going on. Some of the more interesting discussions I had were with lawyers, of all things. This Corps headquarters had to have a staff of lawyers, and they had one of the craziest jobs in the world. I was baffled by it. I read up on it while I was there, and I kept asking them more questions. Here's the trick. You've got, say, in this particular configuration, you've got some Germans, and you've got some people from the Netherlands, and you've got some folks from Norway. And you are trying to bring peace to a country that's invited you to come in to keep it safe, to prevent neighbors from invading, to stop organized crime and things like that. Well, everybody has areas they can work in. Everybody has these agreements that come from their country's political structure, which says what they can do and how they can do it and where they can go and what they can do. And sometimes, say you find a weapons cache or you think there's a terrorist cell, the lawyers have to sit down there with a big chart and go, okay, we can't send the Germans there because the Germans can't go out of this area. And we can't send the Norwegians there because the Norwegians can't go and do anything resembling police work. But maybe we can use the Dutch because their rules will allow us to basically squeak by and have them do the job. And they have to pick nationalities to do jobs based on the legal restrictions on their behavior imposed by their home countries. Now start imagining that times 28 nations. And the United States, of course, is as good at this as anybody. We have all kinds of rules that govern what we can do. For instance, we will not allow, and I think you can understand why, we will not allow our soldiers to be put on trial by absolutely anybody but us under any circumstances whatsoever. No matter what we do, we will not turn them over to anybody, be it NATO, be it the United Nations, be it the International Court, be it a local jurisdiction. We ain't doing that. Because that's what our political leadership has decided are the rules that we work under. So that was one of the more complicated things, and I wasn't expecting the law to be so important, but they kept talking about these caveats and rules of engagement all the time. It drove everything we were doing. When I was born, they cut Germany in half. And the Germans, of course, the East German country basically went out of business in 1990. So I spent a couple of days talking to people off and on about what had happened since reunification. Because the stories I had heard from the 90s were that it was a very, very sloppy joining together of the two former, it used to be one country, then it's two, then it's one again. They said that after the 90s it actually got a lot better, and they say today there's really no particular distinction. At least that was the perception that people were giving me. But I got some really interesting anecdotes about what happened when the Eastern European countries suddenly lost communism. First of all, what I was told was that they didn't see it coming. Now, I don't know that we saw necessarily what happened in 1990 coming from that far off either. But they had no clue. They thought they were going to win. And so they're winning, it's all over, and they lost. And it was really confusing for them. One of them told me that he was speaking with, I think it was an East German captain who is now an officer in the just National German Army. And he remarked, rather chillingly, that, after you won and we lost, you brought us all into your army. If it had gone the other way, I don't think that's how it would have turned out. And this was really interesting, and it describes so much. If you're ever curious about the history of communism, this is just the greatest anecdote, and I'm sorry if I'm fudging on the numbers because I didn't write this down when I was talking to the soldier. He said that he had been working with an East German soldier who was an officer and a college graduate. He had a degree in economics. And the one job he had was in an East German military base. Now they had something, I think it was like 2,000 soldiers, but don't quote me on that because I'm not dead sure. I didn't write it down at the time, but about 2,000 soldiers. They had one shower facility with 6 nozzles, 6 shower heads. And the only job he had all week long was to schedule people for showers with a degree in economics so that it would be right and fair that everybody would get their turn with the shower. Now, I think coming at it from a Western perspective, we would have had a slightly different answer to that question. After about 2 days of that, what would we do? We built more showers. But again, that's the kind of world they lived in. It was a very poor world. Interestingly, I was told that when they finally both saw what the other side was up to during the Cold War, both the East and the West said, "Why were we afraid of you? You couldn't have done anything to us," for very, very different reasons and different perceptions about what was important. But here's the last one, and this to me was the biggest point of all of this. In the 1st German Panzer Division, and again, I'm hoping that you have enough background in history to have a sense of how weird this is, there is a Polish brigade in the German Panzer Division. Now, to imagine a group of Polish tankers in a unit of Germans, the mind reels. Again, these are not just people who had, a bad week with each other. These are people who have horrific massacres going back millennia. And these people are working together. And what are they doing? They don't have a common enemy so much. We're not sitting there. I mean, when I was doing military training in the 80s, it was, here come the Soviets, and we're going to stop their tanks with our tanks. It was, okay, we are invited to come into a country that's having a lot of problems and is flat on its back economically, socially, that has no security. We are there as guests of that country, this multinational force, to come there and to bring peace. And that's what we kept trying to figure out how to do. How do we manage to make the world a better place through these particular odd set of tools? And I really wish, I think this is one of the most amazing questions that anybody involved in the humanities could get into. How do you really turn a bunch of people who are enemies since the beginning of time, how do you get them to work cooperatively with each other? And they, in fact, made lots of jokes about it. You would not believe the World War II jokes these people told. One of the things that stunned me, and I asked them about this when I was in something equivalent to a Best Buy store in Germany, they had, of course, a lot of American TV shows on DVD. One of them that they had was Hogan's Heroes. And I'm going, you've got Hogan's Heroes? Germans would watch this? Oh, they thought it was hilarious. I'm going, what? But it's all changed. In fact, they were talking about one gag where the Germans spent a lot of money recently to bail out the Greeks. And they told a nasty little joke there that everybody but the Americans thought was funny. And because there's so much money going from Germany to buttress up the Greek economy. And again, I don't know if you follow any of this in the news, but they've had horrible, horrible economic problems. And so the Germans were joking, given how much money we've given them, we should get one of their islands. Hey, how about the island of Crete? Because we worked so hard to win that one in World War II. And everybody around the table laughs except the Americans who go, you can't say that. Even the Greeks evidently thought that was funny. Anyhow, I'm trying to honor the time here. I do have a little time for questions, or if you want to talk to me afterwards, because I know we're trying to wrap up at 1 o'clock. I just really appreciate you coming out here to the Friday Speaker Series. I love bringing the community onto Jefferson College. Like I've said, been here since '99. I absolutely adore this place. And anything we can do that brings the community here, in addition to your kids and your grandkids and so forth, is a magnificent and wonderful thing. Any quick questions for me? Or I'll stick around for a little while if you have anything to follow up.
How long were you over there?
It's just 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And again, for me, it was all brand new, and I asked a lot of questions. And that's just what I wanted to kind of share, is what I found by talking to people. So again, I'm not the big expert on any of this. But this is a very different NATO than what you're talking about from the 1960s. The whole thing is a different animal. And that's, again, something that I thought would be relevant even if people had some experience of it from other days. Yes, please.
You mentioned that English slang,
American English.
Was current. Has it changed, or do you know whether it has changed with a modification of American English slang stateside?
It stays very current because our media has enormous impact around the world. And again, if the Germans typically have enough of a population, enough money where they dub everything into German, but a lot of the other countries, like when I was talking to the Norwegians, they don't dub it into Norwegian, they're watching it with subtitles. And so they hear it as fast as we hear it, basically. So again, that's something I've known since growing up, is just that the enormous influence of American culture, and it's not our best culture, it's our pop culture, is everywhere. Music and TV shows and movies are huge. But again, they're up to speed on that stuff. It was really quite impressive. Well, thank you so very much, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.